Thank you. After that very interesting first session, we move into sort of the second part of the morning, which is on what is the evidence for working cross-sectorally to address undernutrition. I think follows very nicely from the comments you just heard. The first talk will be by Dr. Marie Ruel, titled The Global Evidence Base for What Different Sectors Can Contribute to Undernutrition. Dr. Ruel has been director of IFPRI's Poverty, Health and Nutrition Division since 2004, and before that she was Senior Research Fellow and Research Fellow in that division starting in 1996. Okay. Okay. All right. So unfortunately, Dr. Agnihotri and Dr. Reddy have...
Let me clarify. I'm going precisely for the cause of nutrition. So you may pardon me for this, because Secretary WCD has called a meeting. I think it's important to be there.
Okay. Well, thank you to both of you for your presence here today. I think we've lost Dr. Reddy as well. We had to go to another meeting. Moving on, Dr. Ruel, as I mentioned, has been at IFPRI since 1996, and she's led a number of projects, particularly the excellent work, as Schengen mentioned, on nutrition, and worked on things that we're all very familiar with, including IFPRI-POSHAN work in Guatemala, where she lived and worked for 6 years. And she was head of the Nutrition and Health Division at the Institute of Nutrition at INCAP. So I'd like to invite you to present the first of the two talks this morning.
Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. I feel that I don't come to India often enough, so I am very happy to have the privilege of being invited to the meeting and contributing as much as I can. I feel that the very first session actually said it all. I feel it was an excellent beginning, and really, the speakers made all the main points that this conference is about. I guess now we're going to move into a little bit more deep discussions on the different topics. My presentation is still rather global, talking about still some of the aspects related to why we need to work multi-sectorally, and bringing some of the evidence of actually our lack of really great success in the future, and the need to do things differently now if we want to really accelerate progress in improving nutrition. So I based some of my comments at the beginning on the Lancet series from 2013. You probably have seen or heard of the Lancet series on maternal and child nutrition that was published in 2013. So the Lancet describes the global problem of nutrition as a massive unfinished agenda. Clearly, we still have a huge burden of malnutrition, undernutrition, 165 million children overall in the world that are stunted, 1 in 5 children. Malnutrition is responsible for 40%, at least 40% of mortality in children under 5. We also know that micronutrient deficiencies continue to be widespread. We don't have such clear numbers on many of the micronutrient deficiencies, but we know it's a very large problem, and we know anemia, for example, is particularly a problem. Iron deficiency, vitamin A deficiencies, zinc deficiencies are very widespread. We also have, at the same time, an emerging, not that emerging actually, but rapidly increasing problem of overweight and obesity. Even in children now, it started with having women that were suffering from overweight and obesity in countries in transition, especially in Latin America, and now children are becoming overweight and obese as well. India has a stubborn burden of malnutrition, a very stubborn problem. My numbers here are from the 2005 last data. They're a little bit outdated. I know things have improved, and I've heard this morning people reporting 40% of stunting. So that is a topic of another discussion, I think. But the numbers we've been using up to now were that malnutrition, stunting had not improved a lot up until 2005, and we had up to 48% of children stunted in India. And with these numbers in 2013, for the Lancet, the calculations were that India hosts about 30% of the world's stunted children. 20% of children are wasted. For wasting, it is a very high number because wasting is associated with mortality, with high levels of mortality, and there's also severe wasting, that is children that are very thin for their age, for their height. The number of low birth weight babies also was reported to be the highest in the world, with 7.4 million low birth weight babies every year, and 70% of children anemic. The problem of malnutrition in India starts with the mother. I think everybody realizes that 33% of the women are underweight, have low BMI, and this is women of reproductive age. Anemia is in more than half of women, and overweight and obesity has not caught up yet with many other countries at similar levels of development, but is getting there. India also has large disparities. This was mentioned, disparities by state, disparities between urban, rural, and here the one that I wanted to highlight was the disparities by socioeconomic status. The Q1 and Q5 on the left side here, this is the wealthiest segments of the population and the poorest, and you can see a difference of about or more than 30 percentage points between the rich and the poor in this country. And this is obvious, and people know that, but those are a huge number compared to other countries. There are also urban-rural disparities, which are not as large, and disparities within urban and within rural, but overall disparities are a very large part of the problem here. Now, what the Lancet series was telling us in 2013 is that we know what to do. In nutrition, we know what to do. We have a series of 10 typical nutrition-specific interventions that we know are essential and will need to be implemented at large scale and have high coverage. So those range from interventions to address maternal nutrition. I will not go into details, you might be very well aware of those, but the general categories is that, as I said before, you need to improve maternal nutrition during pregnancy, and actually we also need to improve maternal nutrition before pregnancy. This was also mentioned this morning. We need to improve infant and young child feeding practices. This is the exclusive breastfeeding during the first 6 months, continued breastfeeding, and optimal complementary feeding practices, and there are guiding principles on those. We need to provide micronutrient supplementation to children at risk, and we need to do a better job at managing acute malnutrition, again, because of this so severe problem of mortality related to severe acute malnutrition, but also because these children will remain malnourished for the rest of their lives. Now, the countries that have the highest burden of stunting, we have here the 34 countries that account for 90% of the global burden of malnutrition, and obviously India is there and contributes a lot. And if we were to scale up the 10 interventions that I mentioned before to a coverage, a very high coverage, which is absolutely not achieved right now, we would reduce malnutrition, stunting in particular, by about 20%. This is good, but this is very disappointing in many ways. This is not enough. We need to do better. we need to reduce stunting, we need to accelerate our rate of reduction of stunting. So we need to do things differently from what we've done in the past. And one of the main conclusions of the Lancet series is that we need to complement our action, our direct nutrition interventions or our nutrition-specific interventions with accelerated work in terms of nutrition-sensitive programs and policies from a variety of sectors. And that brings us to the topic of this conference, what we need to do and how we need to work more multi-sectorally. We also need to make sure that we create and maintain an enabling environment for nutrition to help accelerate progress overall in nutrition. So this is the topic of this presentation and of the conference in general. And first, let me just clarify what we mean by nutrition sensitive. There is still, I still hear a lot of people say, but we don't even know what nutrition sensitive mean. We certainly don't know how to do it. And so I just wanted to provide information on what definition we came up with in the Lancet series of what we mean by nutrition sensitive. So here we are talking about programs that address the critical underlying determinants of undernutrition. So we're talking about programs that address poverty, food insecurity, women's lack of education, women's lack of empowerment or social status, as well as poor care and feeding practices, the lack of knowledge and of adoption of optimal practices, and the lack of access of people to health, water, and sanitation. So some programs and lots of programs in those different sectors are being implemented to address the problems, these problems, but very often they don't necessarily include nutrition in them. And so here we're talking about making them more nutrition sensitive, meaning including nutrition goals and nutrition actions, not just nutrition goals. Sometimes people have a program in social protection and say, okay, we're giving a cash transfer and we want it to improve nutrition. This is not being purposeful. We have to make the programs being purposefully having a nutrition goal, but also incorporating nutrition actions. The benefit of working across sectors and working with many other sectors is that we can leverage some of the sectors that actually could be excellent delivery platforms and much better delivery platforms to scale up our nutrition-specific interventions. And I'll give a few examples in a minute. So these other sectors, we can benefit from them addressing the underlying determinants of malnutrition, but also using them to deliver our nutrition interventions. So here are some of the sectors that we're talking about that are absolutely essential for improving nutrition, and we really mean all of them and more. Education is not on this slide, and this is for lack of space. Education also needs to be more nutrition sensitive, and there will be discussions on this topic later this week, as well as early child development. So those are just examples. And social protection is one example. Programs in social protection can really be a very good platform for us to improve nutrition. Agriculture is an obvious one, and I will get back to these two briefly. The health sector is obviously our favorite platform. We've worked with the health sector forever in trying to incorporate nutrition there. Gender and finally water and sanitation are also cross-cutting issues that need to be addressed everywhere and where we could work together more closely. And I'm not talking about individually working with each of those sectors. I'm talking about trying to work with many of those sectors at the same time. So it is not a simple task. So first of all, what are the main pathways of impact of nutrition-sensitive programs on nutrition? And I will be brief, but I just wanted to show one of the main impacts, for example, of social protection programs as well as agriculture is through income. So these programs can help improve the income of the poor. And we've looked at the relationship between increasing income, this is the GDP per capita, and this is the stunting reduction, the stunting prevalence. So we've modeled multiple data sets and looked at what happens when GDP per capita improves, what's the rate of reduction in stunting. And we find that a 10% increase in GDP per capita leads to a 6% reduction in stunting. This is nice, but again, it's not fast enough. We need a lot faster pace of reduction in stunting. And we can see also that some countries are either negative outliers, meaning they have more stunting than they should given their level of development, and this includes India. The big circle here is India, and some countries are doing better than expected. So we can learn from these countries that have a much lower rate of stunting for their given GDP. And so those are in here, and you see Brazil that we talk about a lot, and Sri Lanka and other countries in the shaded area. The other side of the coin, unfortunately, is that increasing GDP is also associated with more rapid rises in overweight and obesity than the reductions of stunting. So here we have a 10% increase in GDP leads to a 7% increase in overweight and obesity in women. And this is an unintended consequence, and it has happened very quickly and at a much higher rate than that in many countries in Latin America. You can see that there's lots of countries from Latin America that are outliers, meaning at their level of economic development, they have way too much overweight and obesity. India, on the other hand, is at the bottom here, and so it doesn't have as much obesity as could be predicted by the level of development, but again, those are outdated data. This is the 2005 data, so we'll be interested in seeing the update here. So income is a good thing for improving nutrition, but it's really not enough, and actually it can have negative impacts. Women's empowerment is another very important pathway. In some of these nutrition-sensitive programs, if we can improve women's empowerment, we know that we can improve many other aspects of these women's households, their own health, the health of their children, and that we can foster. Empowering women means fostering better practices. There are association studies that show that women that are more empowered do have better practices and are more prone to using health and other services and having maybe a better use of resources overall in the household. So this is something that I'm sure we'll come back to a lot, but it is key for improving nutrition. Now, quickly on agriculture, Schengen mentioned some of the ways that agriculture can be made more nutrition sensitive. Here, what I wanted to show was the pathways that are simplified here on how agriculture can help improve nutrition. And the main pathways are here. Agriculture increases income. It increases the food available and the access of people to food. And it may have a positive impact on food intake. But then what we have seen from various reviews is that, again, this is not automatic, that achieving these improvements here will necessarily lead to better nutrition of the mother of the child. There are many other things that might happen that will improve the access of the household to better food and to more food, but may not translate necessarily directly in better nutrition for their children. So some of those things, again, women are at the center of the pathways by which agriculture links to nutrition, and their role is extremely important in allowing the translation of agriculture into better nutrition for their children. Agriculture can have negative effects on women. It may disempower them if we're not careful. It may also affect their health negatively and their nutritional status negatively. So we need to make sure that agriculture is gender sensitive and promotes the empowerment of women and their ability to help improve the nutritional status of their children. This is a busy slide, and actually I should have mentioned those are slides that were developed by Shelley Sundberg and Laura Burks for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I like the way the first couple of slides are very simplified, and here what this slide shows is where you can actually intervene in many different ways to make agriculture more nutrition and more gender sensitive. And I won't go into the details, but those are all leverage points where we can sit down with programs and think, okay, this is how we can make this program more nutrition sensitive. In terms of social safety nets, as I mentioned, social safety nets are a potential, very promising type of programs and policies that can help improve nutrition. They are everywhere. Many countries, or most countries, have social safety nets or social protection programs of some sort, and they provide transfer to 1 billion poor people in the world. They are often well-targeted and actually reaching the poor, which means that they're also reaching families that need improvements in nutrition. So they can be a platform for us. They've been shown to have positive impacts on poverty, on food security, on women's empowerment, on the use of services. They've done good things, but their impacts on nutrition so far has been limited. There are several reasons for that. First of all, many original programs were not designed specifically to improve nutrition. They might have measured nutrition, but they may not have had nutrition interventions. And some were not necessarily well targeted to have an impact on nutrition. So there are lots of reasons, but I just wanted to show some preliminary results of one such program in Bangladesh, which was implemented by WFP and evaluated by IFPRI. What this shows is that the program was comparing different modalities. It compared providing cash versus food versus cash plus food versus cash plus nutrition, behavior change communication. So this last column here is the group that received cash and an intensive nutrition behavior change communication strategy. And we can see that the reduction in stunting compared to the control group was the largest and probably the only one statistically significant compared to the control group. So this shows the importance of integrating nutrition in this type of social transfer program if we really are serious about improving nutrition. So why do we need multiple sectors? This has been mentioned, and we will provide a few more figures to show the reasons why we really need to work cross sectors. This is a slide from work done by Lisa Smith and Lawrence Haddad, which used 116 developing countries and data from 1970 to 2010. And what it does is it tries to looks at what is the contribution of different sectors or programs in different sectors or improvement in different sectors in terms of reducing stunting over time. And we can see that food, so these two green area are the food component, so we do need enough energy, and we need energy from non-staples, which is a proxy for dietary quality. 35% is related to water and sanitation, and the other 33% is women's education and status. This doesn't have everything. It has those factors, and these factors basically are food, health, food, water, sanitation, and women's education. So it really is similar to the food, health, and care. And we can see that the contribution of each of those is about equal. If we look at it differently, here's an analysis done by Derek Heady and collaborators on two countries. So you have at the center the Nepal case, and the outside ring is Bangladesh. So we don't have this information for India, and I hope we can do that at some point. But this is looking again at changes in stunting between 1997 and 2011. And what is interesting here is that, again, we have income, wealth is important. It's explaining about a quarter of the improvement in stunting over time in these two countries. Education is particularly important in Bangladesh, less so in Nepal. I guess Bangladesh has made a lot of progress in educating women in particular, and this is coming out as being very important. In Nepal, the improvements in health services, access to health services, are more important than in Bangladesh, probably again because they were worse to start with. And the rest, sanitation, demographic changes, maternal height, are also important. So this is very useful in terms of giving us an idea, first of all, that multiple sectors are needed, and we need these improvements in all of those things. And also there are differences between countries and where they are at and what they need to improve in order to go faster in reducing stunting. This is Brazil. I'm not going to discuss this one, but Brazil has achieved incredible improvements and reductions in stunting over a period of 30 years or so, and a rate of reduction in stunting of 6 percentage points in the last 10 years of this, basically eliminating stunting. And what I wanted to show on this one is probably the most important aspect of the reduction of stunting in that country was the reduction in inequalities. So this is sorry, I'm done. This is the income quintiles, and we can see that in '96 there were quite large disparities like we saw in India. And the work of the Zero Hunger program especially was to reduce inequalities by targeting the poorest of the poor and reaching the poorest of the poor with health services, with education, with water and sanitation, and they reduced inequalities to very, very low. So in conclusion, as has been said this morning, nutrition is a multifaceted, multi-causal problem that requires multi-sectoral solutions. Scaling up nutrition-specific interventions is necessary but not sufficient. So scaling up these 10 nutrition interventions will get us only that far. We need to do a lot more and a lot better. And in order to achieve greater and faster improvements, we need to leverage multiple sectors. We basically need to integrate nutrition in as many sectors as relevant. And use these sectors as platforms to increase the scale of our nutrition interventions, their coverage, and make sure that they reach the poor. We need to make them not only nutrition sensitive, but gender sensitive as well. We need to reduce inequities. This is particularly true for countries where such inequities are so large. Better targeting of the poor, better focus on pro-poor policies, and excuse the typo on the poor. And we need to focus on prevention. I haven't mentioned, and not many people have mentioned the first 1,000 days, but in terms of prevention, we need to focus on girls throughout the life cycle from birth, very importantly during the first 2 years, but also during adolescence and the reproductive period. Thank you very much.